fun play. Decided to color inside the lines for this tournament, but count me among the disappointed.
It'll be interesting to see some players like Tom, where they have this tournament, then an invitational, then the Players' Championship. You know, what their progression of decks is through there. They probably they don't want to show their hand going into the Players' Championship because it's such a small tournament.
Exactly, and that's the type of field like we saw at World Championships where if you have information about what other people in the field are playing, that can dramatically influence the cards you choose to play because there's so few people in the field.
Absolutely. We'll see game here. Brian is on the play. So he's playing Mardu mid-range. Tom is on 6 cards. Brian starts on a Temple of Silence. Jeskai Token's deck was pretty impressive the last round, I'd say, when we saw it. That was against an aggro deck. It kind of adapted into a control role. This time, it's not the control deck anymore. I think it's the aggro deck.
Well,
Or
it depends
maybe.
what kind of
I don't know.
I think this matchup can play out both ways. When Tom's on the token plan, it's really hard for Mardu to answer those kind of cards efficiently. Although Brian is playing 2 copies main deck of Anger the Gods, which is a big trump if Tom goes down that road. So we can see the matchup play both ways, where Tom's playing individual threats and Brian's using spot removal, or Tom's playing a bunch of tokens, and if Brian doesn't have Anger the Gods, then Brian sort of has to become the beatdown deck.
Yeah, you do see a lot of mismatched removal in Brian's deck. He has 3 Chain to the Rocks, 4 Crackling Doom. Those are all cards not particularly well suited against a token strategy.
That's the issue with Mardu, is you have all these different removal spells. Some of them are very efficient against certain things and not that efficient against others. So when removal lines up the right way, great, but it does struggle in games where, as you mentioned, you have your Crackling Doom against the Hordling Outburst, or the Lightning Strike against the Siege Rhino.
Yeah. Rabble Master on turn 3 is the first play of the game that's going to, on Brian's side, he'll swing in for 1. Tom can match back with his own Rabble Master, opts not to, just plays land and passes. See, raise the alarm at the front of his hand, maybe he can get that. But Brian's just going to go for a curve out here. This is Butcher of the Horde.
Yeah, trying to be as explosive as possible here. There are some risks with this play, of course. If Brian pushes too hard here, then something like Jeskai Charm sitting in on top of the deck can really push Brian back, but
yeah, so before combat, Tom lightning strikes the Goblin Rabble Master, so that Brian can't get a free haste trigger there, so he'll just take 1.
But still, the Butcher in play, and I don't think Tom has an answer to it just yet. That's the nice thing about playing with Butcher of the Horde. The floor on it is 5/4 flyer. That's
right.
The worst, the basic cable version of the card. And that's still a very good deal.
And a lot of good follow-up here for Brian. He has a pair of lightning strikes. Draw of the turn was Thoughtseize. Tom, no 4th land. He did play Hordling Outburst. We'll get a look at the rest of Tom's hand here as he's going to get Thoughtseized. It's a pair of Raise the Alarms, a Seeker of the Way, a Goblin Rabble Master, and a Treasure Cruise to top it all off.
It's a very soft hand. No way to get the Butcher of the Horde off the table, nor is there a way to block it. And the Treasure Cruise here a little bit on the slow side.
Racing Butcher's very hard, and if he can't race it or remove it, well, he's going to have to find a way to do one of those.
Yep.
And right now he doesn't have that.
I could see taking the Treasure Cruise out of this hand, even though, and that's what Brian does here, just because, even though it looks like that card might be too slow to impact this game, just because nothing else matters in that hand. And it's redundant too. Tom's got multiple creatures, multiple Raise the Alarms. You can't really attack that hand that way. So even though the Treasure Cruise doesn't look that good on the surface, it's the only unique element of Tom's hand.
Swing with both creatures from Brian. He offers the Goblin trade. Tom accepts. He's down to 13. He'll put Brian to 13 as well. Draws a land for the turn, but it's going to come into play tapped as its Mystic Monastery. And no other plays from Tom, leaving up some Raise the Alarm. And that'll put him down to 8. Still those burn spells hanging out in Brian's hand. He's drawn another Thoughtseize. We'll see if he uses it. Answer looks like it's going to be yes.
I suppose no reason not to. He knows he's not at any risk of getting burned out this game.
And he'll take Goblin Rabble Master. That leaves Tom with some white 2-drops. Can Tom race back? It seems hard because Brian has a pair of lightning strikes that Tom will be able to get this. He'll need to just draw a removal spell for this Butcher.
Yeah, and I think he just missed on that draw.
And I don't believe he'll get another draw. He swings Brian down to 7, plays 2 Seeker of the Ways, And Brian shows the lethal burn. Puts Tom down to 2. Tom's tapped out, swing, and we are off to game 2.
Tom is not someone prone to concede. He just actually forces someone to go through the motions if you've never watched Tom there before. So not going to concede in the face of the 2 lightning strikes. Actually makes Brian make the attack.
Sure. So if you've been following online, the popular comic Cardboard Crack is now available in book form. If you head over to Star City Games, you can actually get a copy of that. They're in 3 installments. They are $12.99 each. You can find more about it at starcitygames.com/cardboardcrack. These are actually pretty entertaining.
Yeah, no, it's a very well-received comic. It's amusing. The humor is definitely on the lighter side, but not super serious is what I mean. But definitely enjoyable, good for a giggle. And again, we have 3 books available, $12.99 a piece. starcitygames.com/cardboardcrack for more information.
All right. Looking at the sideboards here, I'm going to go back to that for a second. Tom down a game here. How does he combat mid-range? We saw the transformation into a more control deck. Do you like that here? I'm not sold per se.
Well, I don't like going into the sweepers because Mardu's pretty light on creatures in general. I do like going to the disdainful strokes because he needs to keep Brian off of things like the Butcher of the Horde you just saw, some of his more expensive threats. I think that Tom has a big edge in the matchup if he can keep Brian off of Wingmate Rocks and Butcher of the Hordes and the high-impact cards that Brian has access to.
So if that's true, then Glare of Heresy probably is also coming in.
Exactly. Glare, also a good answer to Burmaz, which can be problematic for this token deck. Other white permanents as well, Butcher of the Horde, Wingmate Rock, and so on.
Yeah, on Brian's side, he doesn't have a great number of weapons available to him. He has a copy of Anger of the Gods, which is pretty good against a tokens deck. But outside of that, I'm not positive what all he wants to use. He has a Glare of Heresy if he wants an extra way to get rid of, the Jeskai Ascendancy. But other cards, Utter End, Elspeth Sun's Champion, End Hostilities, I'm not sure how many of these I actually want.
Well, I think he can still play a control game in this matchup. I definitely like the Glare for the reason that you mentioned. I think Erase might be going a little bit too deep because there's not a lot of targets in the deck. It's just a couple copies of Ascendancy. I think the 1 copy of Anger of the Gods is very good here. So does he want to go as far as to bring in End Hostilities? I think the answer is yes, but I could see going the other way as well.
Yeah, it might be yes because the cards like Change to the Rocks are really ineffective in the matchup. He has a lot of cards he wants to get away from.
Yeah, he has a lot of spot removal to choose from, and there's really only the Rabble Masters and the Seekers where those cards are efficient answers. So he wants to leave in some of that because you don't want to be caught off guard by a Rabble Master draw, so you want some number of Lightning Strikes and Chain the Rocks, but I don't think you want to keep all of that stuff in.
Yeah, how do you feel about Crackling Doom in the matchup?
Mediocre. Probably the first card to go.
Yeah, if it's very likely that if Tom just gets a Raise the Alarm on the board on turn 2, your Crackling Doom is really just not a card anymore.
It's less efficient at answering Rabble Master and Seeker of the Way, which is, in the ideal world, what your Crackling Doom is killing.
Yeah.
And so the upside is pretty low. You're not going to get a Storm Breath Dragon out of Tom or some other very large threat. And 3 mana removal spells that don't always work against a token strategy with a lot of burn is not where you want to be.
Nice. So, we did see Brian get game 1, and that does seem to be a little bit of a soft spot for the Jeskai deck, is we did see Butcher of the Horde be just excellent against what Tom was doing.
Yeah, Tom does have some answers. He has the Jeskai Charms to buy him a little bit of time and the 4 copies of Stoked Flames. But he's pretty light on answers otherwise, and that's all that game came down to. Butcher of the Horde was just much faster than what Tom was doing.
See players getting ready. We're going to go on to the second game here. Tom will be on the play this time. So now you got me curious about this Chromanticore deck. Do we know anything about it other than that it has Chromanticore?
I think Tom may have wrote about it on his most recent article, but I don't know the details. I think Xenagos is in the deck. That's all I know.
Seems how Erase. The problem is like Erase is already getting played. If they erase my Chromanticore, I'm very unhappy with that. I put a lot of work into casting that guy, and you didn't put a lot of work into killing it.
It takes a lot of effort.
All right, game underway. Both players start off with lands. They all have all their colors online. Tom gets the first action down with an end step Raise the Alarm. Creates 2 1/1 white soldier tokens. And we'll see his follow-up. He has a Hordling Outburst, but no 3rd red, so instead it will be Goblin Rabble Master. Makes a Goblin and swings in for 3.
And this is a great draw against someone going tap land on 1, tap land on 2.
Can Brian get an Anger of the Gods? Well, we don't get to know yet. He has a Temple. They came into play tapped. He'll Lightning Strike the Rabble Master, pass back the turn.
Not a good sign if he has an Anger of the Gods in hand. You know, I don't know if he would necessarily fire off the Lightning Strike there. It's a lot of damage, I guess he saves, but...
There's also some danger here. I believe some of his removals chain to the rocks, and while he has double red, none of them are coming from mountains, so there's nothing to chain anything to just yet. Fourth land, however, does come off the top for Brian. It's a Bloodstained Mire. He'll fetch, and now we'll get to see threats come from his side. And we'll see what answers has Tom boarded in, if any. You talked about Disdainful Stroke. It's going to just be Butcher of the Horde for Brian Weller-Gordon.
And I don't think Damage Racing is quite where he wants to be at this spot. He may have nothing better to do with his hand.
Yeah, Tom has Jeskai Charm, Hordling Outburst, Treasure Cruise, and Chandra Pyromaster. And on this untap, he now does have second red, so all his cards are available to him. And he's staying ahead on the board. This looks like a great spot for Tom. We'll see how he presses his advantage, though.
And he has the option of, he's getting close at least to the point where he can cast Treasure Cruise as well. And being on the front foot, resolving Treasure Cruise against a deck that's primarily trying to trade 1-for-1 against you is just a great place to be. Not looking to add the Hordling Outburst, the second one to the table. I like diversifying your threats a little bit with Chandra here. You have to respect the possibility of a removal spell. Also pairs very nicely with the Lightning Strike in hand to kill the Butcher if he assumes that Brian is going to go ahead and recast that, which appears to be the case.
He does have Tom, so he has him down to 9. He needs to stop this lifelink from happening, though. So he pings the Butcher to make it not block, and then uses Lightning Strike to finish it off, puts Brian down to 5, and this is a very scary spot for Brian Weller-Gordon.
And with the combination of pressure in play plus Chandra plus Treasure Cruise, a sweeper is not going to do very much. One threat card does almost nothing because Chandra can make it unable to block. And Brian at 5, so he is in a lot of trouble. And Tom may still be able to survive a lifelink hit here, even if he can't get this Butcher off the table, which seems likely.
Yeah, Butcher was cast there. Yeah, you're absolutely right. He may be able to take a lifelink hit. It really depends what kind of creature Brian's sacrificing. If it's a Hordling Outburst token, maybe not. He's going to ping Brian and the Butcher. Brian goes to 4, takes 3, goes to 1. But 1 is not 0. Pair of Treasure Cruises and a Hordling Outburst in Tom's hand.
Curious which one Tom wants to fire off here with.
Yeah, there's merits to both of them here. He's not going to mess around. He's just going to go ahead and play Hordling Outburst. He has 1 card in his graveyard short of being able to Treasure Cruise.
Just trying to set up the most efficient cruise for next turn. And now Brian needs a sweeper plus a way to gain life, which is asking a lot.
He's got to hope there's no Anger of the Gods or something. And this can be pretty rough. It's a Sorin Solemn Visitor from Brian. He's going to plus it to give Butcher lifelink. It'll knock Chandra down to 1. Brian goes up to 7. But I believe he's dead on board here, but he is not because of change to the rocks. That'll take care of a token.
This is a tough way to do it. Brian not dead yet, but
he is on life support. 5 damage from the creatures, 1 damage from the Chandra, and it looks like Tom does have it. I think he drew a second Chandra.
Yeah, that should do it. Can trigger this Chandra, play the fresh one, use that Chandra as well, and that's exactly 0.
All right, on to game 3. That time, Tom able to battle through a pair of Butcher of the Hordes. And a lot of it was that it didn't seem like Brian had the wind-up for Butcher. You know, he didn't have the Hordling Outburst or the Goblin Rabble Master to lead Butcher in.
Brian's draw the first 3 turns is really what determined the outcome of that game, alongside the fact that he never found Anger of the Gods. Was too slow out of the gates, was in, 0 spell, 0 spell, 0 spell, 1 spell territory, whereas Tom was firing a spell a turn, sometimes 2 spells a turn, and Brian not having a sweeper meant he could never catch up.
Yeah, it is true though, Anger of the Gods, a great weapon here. I think at any of those points, if Brian had an Anger of the Gods, we would have seen a pretty different game.
By the time we got to the last turn, especially with Tom having Treasure Cruise in his hand, it may not have been enough, but there was definitely a couple critical turns there where if Brian had it, he would have had a really good shot of getting back to that game. Because he died with 5 or 6 cards in his hand. He just didn't have time to deploy everything. He had some tools to play with, but just couldn't get onto the board fast enough.
The scary part about Butcher of the Horde is that it's repeatable life gain here. So even if Tom got a chance where he started treasure cruising, if Brian could continue lifelink hits with Butcher, it might not be enough.
Yeah.
You see Brian leaving in cards like Chain to the Rocks, probably just as a concession to his mana curve.
Yeah, if we look at if we go through the deck here, he's got 4 copies of Lightning Strike, 3 copies of Chain of the Rocks, 4 Crackling Dooms. So we have 11 spot removal spells that are not very efficient at answering tokens. They're very good against the Rabble Masters and Seekers that are in Tom's deck.
You could even call Sarkhan a spot removal spell in this matchup. I'm not sure how much he wants to be attacking with that kind of card.
So that's our 12th. The other end is the 13th. So there's a lot of dedicated creature removal for individual threats in this Mardu deck. No surprise, it's one of the incentives to play this sort of thing. So it lines up very poorly with the tokens. Brian has so much of this removal in his deck that he can't really cut all of it. So even though Tom is only bringing the Rabble Masters and the Seeker away, he has to leave in some amount of this Crackling Doom Lightning Strike stuff. I think the Crackling Dooms are probably the easiest card to cut because they're not really that efficient. Chain of the Rocks is a 1-mana spell. It's not even that bad at killing tokens, again, because of mana cost. And Lightning Strikes are very flexible. So those cards, I imagine, are staying in, but the Crackling Dooms probably have to go. And I really like getting some main deck Anger of the Gods into this list, given what's happened at the World Championships.
Yeah, that seems like a strong play. On top of being able to deal with Jeskai tokens, it's not bad against a Hornet Queen style deck either.
Yeah, it kills the Caryatids, and exiling is very valuable. Does a lot of work right now. And it just makes a lot of sense. Mardu very rarely loses to individual threat cards because of the plethora of high-quality spot removal it has access to. But without Anger of the Gods, the Raise the Alarms and Horling Outbursts are problematic for it.
We'll be on to game 3 here. Brian going to be back on the play. And one thing I do like about the matchup here for Mardu is the threats he has. Both Butcher of the Horde and Bramaz seem like quality threats against what Jeskai is trying to do.
And 4 toughness is a nice place to be. Now, Stoke the Flames, kills Bramaz pretty efficiently, but most cards you're going to be playing for 3 mana are going to die to Stoke the Flames. And Bramaz has a lot more upside against things like Buyout Blight, Drown in Sorrow, Lightning Strikes. Last week in Atlanta, Cedric was talking like he wanted to play Mardu. He ended up playing the Abzan Reanimator deck that we had on camera. But one of the major incentives he was talking to me about was Bramaz. He feels like card's really well positioned right now because of the nature of the removal people are playing.
Definitely agree that there's some advantage to that. So Brian's going to be on 6 cards, but he keeps on 6, leads off on Battlefield Forge. It's these setup turns. These are the turns where it seems to me like if Brian actually has something he can cast that's kind of already above expectation, like he doesn't really do much until turn 3.
Yeah, and even starting off the game with Battlefield Forge, I know that doesn't seem like much, but I already feel like Brian's in a tough spot here because one of the ways to recover from the mulligans are your value lands, and because the Mardu deck doesn't really have that many sources of card advantage, it's really important for it to be scrying early on, especially in games where it mulligans. Same way that I felt about, Blue-White Control or Esper when they led off with an island on the first turn of the game. That doesn't seem like much, but in the scheme of things, it does matter a lot because the value lands are a huge part of what make the deck hum.
No, and that's exactly right. When he's playing an untapped land on each turn, it means he doesn't have that value. And Tom will just get to start with a Jeskai Ascendancy on turn 3. No plays before that. Brian does have his 4th land, but some unfortunate sequencing in his draws there. It's a tap land of Nomad Outpost. And looks like there's a Crackling Doom in Brian's hand.
And Tom has just picked up Disdainful Stroke, which means I think he'll be very cautious about tapping out this turn. You just wait, because Brian's not really doing anything. Brian's hand is either removal spells or expensive stuff. So there's no incentive for Tom to move right now.
Yeah, Brian's in a Thoughtseize. Strong play here. Let's see what Tom's done. He's on lands 5 and 6. Disdainful Stroke, Lightning Strike, Jeskai Ascendancy, Stoke the Flames. So almost it's a control hand, I think, from Tom.
And playing a control game makes a lot of sense when you have an Ascendancy in play. His draw steps are just going to be a lot better than Brian's.
And this is why I think is interesting about this Jeskai Tokens build is we haven't seen many Jeskai Ascendancies be able to play this style game before.
It's true. And a lot of that has to do with there's no combo in the deck, so you don't have all the space committed to Spring-Link Drums and Retraction Helixes. You can just be a normal Magic deck.
After the thought sees, Brian's going to go ahead and crack a fetch land. We'll see what his follow-up play is. He knows he has to play around Strike, Stoke, and Ascendancy.
So he can't really commit Butcher the Horde to the table or any of his other threat cards.
Yeah, I mean, he's just going to have to slog through this stuff. He's going to play Butcher. What I like about that is that Tom can't kill it this turn. He has to untap and stoke it.
Yeah, it is better from that position, definitely. Although, this
Great
is even,
draw from Tom.
This is even better.
Hordling Outburst. So now that's only going to cost 1, that Stoke the Flames. See, he loots into a Shivan Reef. He'll go ahead and get rid of Mystic Monastery.
Raise the Alarm and Hordling Outburst alongside Stoke the Flames and Ascendancy. It feels, this is when it feels like a modern deck playing in Standard.
Yes.
These kind of moments. Brian over here with good creatures and good removal spells, and Tom off doing an entirely different thing.
You see their 5th land from Tom. It's that Shivan Reef he looted into. His hand is a Temple, a Lightning Strike, another Ascendancy, and a Stoke the Flames. Brian's going to swing with the flyer. Tom may be able to let this one through, actually. It's not getting lifelink at the moment. And I think Tom comes to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
I mean, if Brian doesn't do anything, I was going to say if he doesn't have a sweeper, this Tom could do a ton of damage. Brian will post-combat go for Anger of the Gods.
Which means that now Tom can use the Lightning Strike on the Butcher instead and leave the Stoke for another 4 to start, which is nice.
He'll do just that. Lightning Strike on Butcher of the Horde. And Anger will resolve. It will exile the Butcher.
And the way this game is shaping up right now, you know, this is where the addition of Treasure Cruise, which is, you know, Yuya's big addition to this deck. The game is shaping up in such a way where Brian's playing all this removal spell. It's going to be hard for him to mount much of an offense because there's so much removal in Tom's deck. And if Tom finds a Treasure Cruise, it's going to be bananas how good it is.
Tom's going full control deck here. 2nd Jeskai Ascendancy in play. He's going to just start digging toward Treasure Cruises.
Except Tom never draws a land for the rest of the game unless he wants to.
Exactly.
And Brian's at the mercy of just regular Magic the Gathering draw steps. They're not playing the same game right now.
There was a Secret of the Way for Tom. It was Lightning Strike by Brian Weller-Gordon. He then followed up with a Sorin. Gets to make a Vampire token, a Tom Ross token at that. But with these 2 Ascendancies, you're right. Tom has great draws for the game. Now he has to convert them into something tangible.
Well, he has 3 Stokes in his hand, so the other option is he can just say, all right, well, I'll start going at you. I think the risk there is that he's committed to killing this token if Sorin stays in play, because Sorin starts giving lifelink, so he can't burn Brian out. So I think Tom is best served just trying to manage the board for the time being.
Yeah, he's going to go with the Vampire, actually, not at the Sorin. And he loots 2 lands off. Sorin will go up to 3, and Brian will pass back. And there we go.
Yep, there it is.
This is the gross one. Treasure Cruise. And there are 4 in his deck. Tom's going to draw to them.
Yeah.
Here's Treasure Cruise number 1.
And this dimension to the deck is just so powerful.
Loots away a land, draws a Raise the Alarm, now has to make a decision. He really could use a threat.
And because of these 2 Ascendancies, if Tom finds additional Treasure Cruises, those are just being cast. I mean, he's going to be chaining off these things for the rest of the game.
Keeps the Raise the Alarm, discards a Stoke, then draws 3, gets another Stoke, a Magma Jet, and a land. Yeah, this is disgusting.
Yeah. These 2 decks are not playing the same game anymore.
Raise the Alarm. It's going to loot once into a Disdainful Stroke, and twice there's a Hordling Outburst. Tom has another decision. I mean, it looked like Tom was planning to stoke the Flames here, but maybe he won't. Maybe he'll just leave up the Disdainful Stroke now.
Well, he can do both. I mean, he's got 2 tokens and 2 mana.
And he'll just main phase Stoke.
Sure.
Loots away a land. Untaps his guys. Loots away another land.
Okay, your turn.
Yeah, a ton of advantage here for Tom.
Creature removal deck.
Yeah.
Have fun with this.
I mean, Tom is more like, yeah, this is really, it's fun because you say this is Jeskai Ascendancy, but I actually think this is Treasure Cruise. Like, without Treasure Cruise, this wouldn't be as broken right now.
Correct.
Bramaz was the play for Brian.
Tom just does not, Tom doesn't have a bad draw for the rest of the game. And he's got 3 copies of Ancestral Recall waiting for him somewhere buried down there. That's a tough combination to beat.
Hordling Outburst cast there. He'll pass, leaving up Disdainful Stroke. Probably okay taking a hit off this Bramaz.
Yeah, that does not matter very much. He can glare at the next turn. Tom's just trying to protect himself from something big happening because, Tom getting hit with the Bramaz or having a chump block, that's not going to pull Brian back into the game.
And here's a swing here. A swing. It looks like Tom's going to go ahead and stoke the flames away the Bramaz. This is all before combat. And now he'll untap. And with 3 guys in play, Tom may just be able to win the game. Well, he doesn't have the stoke anymore. Okay.
It's awkward. He has three spells, but one's a counter spell and 2 of them are glares, with the only targets being his Ascendancy. So he can't do anything just yet. But
if he had that stoke, that would just be lethal, wouldn't it?
Yes, especially when you factor in the loots and the likelihood he finds more action.
I mean, this deck wins. You have to sweep. Once they have 2 Ascendancies in play and this much mana, I feel like you have to sweep the board every turn against them. If you let Tom have these tokens, it just seems like impossible. It's very hard to win through them.
Beating the creatures and Treasure Cruise seems impossible because they require entirely different answers. Oh, sweet.
That's another Ancestral Recall. Okay. They'll still delve 7 more to a Treasure Cruise. And this is just out of control. Oh, also this is the Ancestral that deals 6.
Sure.
Because it's going to pump Tom's whole team twice. He'll loot away a Glare of Heresy. He'll loot away a Glare of Heresy. Oh, Jeskai Charm will be pretty good here. That's before he draws 3 off Treasure Cruise.
Tom's position is so good, he almost forgot to draw off Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, this is gross.
I've had that happen before with Cataxian Probes, where I look at my opponent's hand and I forget to actually draw the card because I'm like, all right, it's a lock.
Yeah, I got this. Oh, and I draw a card. Great. Plays a land. And this is a swing for 9 with that
all right, so this
Jeskai
is
Charm
this
to
is,
pump.
And then that triggers both the Ascendancies, so that's, I think this is 15.
At the moment.
Yeah, and loot a couple more times.
And Lightning Strike. So Lightning Strike actually makes it 24.
Yeah, Lightning Strike here is +7. Is that right?
+9.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, +9.
Yeah. That's a good card. I like the 1 mana draw 3 and then double pump my team.
I can get behind this.
And loot 2. So that's actually a little better than deal 6, draw 3 cards.
And, to circle back to what I was talking about before a little bit, I am surprised that there are not more Banishing Lights in the field.
Well, Brian's going to Crackling Doom. They're currently 6/6 lifelinks. And that'll do it. So he was like, oh, maybe I can only take 12. And there comes a Lightning Strike from Tom. And he'll take game 3 and win this match.
Jeskai Ascendancy is quite the card. And the builds of this deck have only gotten more streamlined. Now we're at a point where there's not even a combo involved because Ascendancy is so good that when that card's unchecked, you're probably going to win anyway. You don't need to go through the motions of going infinite.
Well, I think what we've realized, and you see this in the modern deck too, is that while you can go infinite with a Jeskai Ascendancy, while you can make it a really good card, the treasure cruising was so good with Jeskai Ascendancy that it didn't really matter what the other cards were. As long as you had spells, Jeskai Ascendancy, and Treasure Cruise, you were good to go.